Hello, everyone. This is Sean Smith, and you are tuned in to the Country Fried Outdoors Chasing Your Experience podcast. The podcast that will connect you to resources regionally and nationwide to engage them and you in open, honest discussions so that we can inspire the growth that you need to chase the experience you want. So strap yourself in because here we go. Welcome to the Chasing Your Experience podcast. I'm your host, Sean Smith, and I'm excited to bring you an insightful episode today. We're taking a closer look at ticks right here in Ohio and the diseases they transmit to humans. It's a topic that is becoming more relevant, and we have the perfect guest to enlighten us on this matter. Joining us is Dr. Risa Pesapane from The Ohio State University, affectionately known as the Tick Lady. Risa is a broadly trained disease ecologist who studies parasites and pathogens in both human and animal populations, with expertise spanning community ecology, molecular ecology, landscape ecology, microbiology, entomology, and epidemiology. Risa is at the forefront of understanding these tiny creatures and their impact on health. Risa holds a PhD in ecology with a specialization in the biology of vector-borne diseases from UC Davis, as well as a master's degree in wildlife science focused on disease ecology from Virginia Tech. She also graduated with simultaneous undergraduate degrees in wildlife science and biology from Virginia Tech. Beyond her impressive academic achievements, Risa is a passionate advocate for interdisciplinarity, One Health initiatives, and promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in science. Outside of her work, Risa balances life as a mom to 2 young children and several pets. And she loves tackling a variety of home and garden projects with her partner on their small homestead. So join me as we delve into the world of ticks, explore the diseases they spread, and gain valuable insights from Risa. No pun intended, but let's dig in. So anyways, Dr. Risa Pesapane, how are you doing?
I am good.
I'm glad that we finally were able to get together and have this conversation we're about to have about ticks in Ohio. And I don't think we need to just really narrow it down to just ticks in Ohio. I think we can look at, a broader scale if you like to, once we get there. But, it is springtime. And as the weather starts to warm up, the little nasty little critters out in the forest start to come alive, and people are also becoming more active in the outdoors. So I thought, what a better time to have a conversation about ticks, especially, there's a lot of things in the news, a lot of things going around about the rise in like Lyme disease. Like I can think back a few years ago where it was, I don't know, you wouldn't hear anything about it, but now you can't go very far without like a public health billboard out there saying, hey, you got to watch out for, Lyme disease, or Lyme disease is on the rise, and about tick awareness and stuff. So I think it's a great time.
And yeah, it is a good time as we approach May, which is Lyme Disease Awareness Month. And the trend you're talking about is not just an improvement in our, communications about this. It's based on the fact that since 2010, the number of cases of Lyme disease in Ohio has increased 47-fold.
That's a pretty good increase.
Yes. So we have over 1,700 cases last year in 2024. And there are many reasons why counting cases and getting correct diagnoses are difficult. And so the CDC typically says whatever number your state is reporting, you should probably multiply that by 10 for the true burden in your state.
Yeah. And I'm a statistics kind of guy when it comes to certain things. And I think that's might even be conservative thinking too, that it just tenfold. We look at a lot of statistics because there's a lot of things, like you said, that gets misdiagnosed or doesn't go or goes unreported. So yeah, I would say it's probably a fair statement, but
Yeah, it's pretty staggering numbers. And in fact, we are likely to see Ohio change from a low incidence state to a high incidence state at the federal level.
so that's an interesting comment, and we'll dive in that real quick, and then we'll give you a chance to kind of introduce yourself as to why listeners should pay attention to what you're saying. But let's talk. Why is it that Ohio would be switching over to that high, what you call that, high incident rate?
Yeah, so federally, if you have an incidence of 10 or more cases per 100,000 people per year for more than 3 years in a row, you qualify as a high incidence state.
I'm interested in picking your brain on that, but I think before we get too far into that, how about we give a chance for you to, and bad host of me, maybe give you a chance to introduce yourself as to why. And I'll start it off with I was talking to Dr. Mike Tonkovich and from ODNR. He's the Deer Program Administrator. And I said, listen, I want to get this. I want to do a podcast and I've been wanting to do this for a couple of years now about ticks. I said, do you know anybody who'd be knowledgeable in that? And your name was like, I don't think the bubbles were done on the text string for him to come back and say and give me your name. So obviously you're well known in that world for this topic. So Risa, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to us and let us know, or let the audience know, why you're qualified for us to listen to you about these statistics.
Sure. Well, I got my PhD in the biology of vector-borne disease. And I came to Ohio in 2019, and I knew that Ohio was situated at the leading edge of range expansion for a number of medically important ticks. And so I was very interested in basically having this natural study site and wanted to create an entire research program around understanding the distribution and diversity of different ticks and tick-borne pathogens in Ohio. And so over the past 6 years, we have worked very hard to collect a wide variety of ticks from across the state. I have over 37,000 ticks in my archive from more than 75 of our 88 counties. And I have also created a public tick submission program as well. And we have created a tick-borne pathogen testing lab. And I work very closely with our Ohio Department of Health and our Ohio Department of Agriculture to address the growing threat of ticks and perform tick surveillance in the state. So essentially, I work very closely with our state tick experts and am essentially one of the most knowledgeable people on the distribution and concerns of ticks in the state.
I'm curious, how does a person get involved with how did you make the decision
why
that why ticks?
Yeah, I do get asked this question a lot. I typically describe it as a slow romance with ticks because I started working on wildlife actually, and I obviously encountered a lot of ticks on wildlife, and I was, as someone who studies ecology of infectious diseases, I was really interested in the complexity of vector-borne disease and how different ecological communities can maintain, this tick and these pathogens that come from these different hosts. So it's really a really interesting thing to study. And my favorite thing about it is that I can work on livestock health, companion animal health, public health, or wildlife health through the lens of ticks.
That's a pretty broad spectrum. I hear you using I hear you using a term. Are you saying vector-borne? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah. So an arthropod vector, in this case, the tick, or sometimes mosquitoes, flies. That this disease is born of those arthropod vectors.
Okay. All right. That's I want a clarification on that because I'm like vector-borne. I don't think I've heard that before. So anyways, I guess we can, informally refer to you as the tick lady, right? I think I've heard that in some conversations before, and you just brought that up to me as well. So, well, Risa, I'm glad to have the tick lady on here and have this discussion about ticks because, as we discussed, and it is becoming, springtime, the weather's starting to warm up. People are more active outdoors now. And so they're going to come across ticks. Their pets are outdoors as well. That could be coming back into the house. Livestock, as you said, is a pretty broad spectrum thing. So I'm really interested in this discussion, and it sounds like you have quite the collection because I wrote that down. It's like over 37,000 tick specimens. That's a
A
lot.
lot.
That's a lot. How much space does that take up? I mean, I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, well, most of them are stored individually in tubes in boxes that hold about 100 tubes and stacked on shelving in my lab.
Mm-hmm.
So one very large metal, utility shelf so far.
So let's dive into this. I guess let's start off with the very basic, the very front end of this. What are the tick species that are found in Ohio?
Yeah. And this is an important question because that diversity has changed very much in recent years. So historically, we all kind of were familiar with one medically important tick in Ohio, the one probably everyone has seen, the American dog tick. It's kind of brown with a lot of coloration, and it's really common throughout the United States and very commonly encountered by people and dogs. It's still an important tick, but in the past 20 or so, 25 years, we've really seen a large change to where the Lone Star tick has moved into the state. The black-legged tick has moved and stretched across the state. We also now have this Gulf Coast tick, and we have a new tick in the United States, which was introduced probably a couple of times between 2010 and 2017 that is now spreading across Ohio called the Asian longhorned tick. And so we went from essentially having one medically important tick that you could encounter out in nature to having 5 medically important ticks that you could encounter in nature.
Great. I thought I was bad when I heard about Lone Star ticks coming in here. Now we got to add 2 more to it.
Yes.
So you're using the term medically important ticks. What is that? What are you referring to there?
Yeah, so technically there's more than 14 species of ticks that you could find if you were me in Ohio that are on various wildlife species, but they typically don't bite people. So that is why we refer to certain ticks as medically important, because those are the ones that are likely to bite you or your companion animals and, potentially transmit disease. The others can have a role in the maintenance of these different, pathogens which cause disease in an ecosystem, but they don't typically bite you and are therefore not responsible for transmitting the disease to you. And so we don't consider them to be medically important.
Okay. Now I'm even more worried because I said there's about 14 different tick species, but I guess I feel a little bit better now because you say at least the handful that we're probably going to focus on the most are the one that are like medically important as we put it. So I have definitely learned something already. So what do you think would be the prevalence rate then? Like if we, what would be the most commonly found or most commonly, I guess, encountered tick species of those medically important ones that people would see here in Ohio?
Yeah, so we know based on submissions to the tick program and in other states as well that the 2 most commonly encountered ticks are typically the American dog tick, so the one, historically we've had, and the black-legged tick, which is sometimes also called the deer tick, and that's the one that can transmit Lyme disease. So those 2 are the most common, but anywhere that Lone Star ticks are abundant, they are also very likely to be found and are considered kind of aggressive ticks, aggressive biters. So we often refer to these as the big 3. And so in places where you have Lone Stars, they are also likely going to be very common on submissions.
All right. Well, I think the next hardest part that we're going to have for us is how to identify without there being pictures. And I think by the time I'm done with cover art and stuff, or start doing some of the Instagram push for this episode, I'll probably include some images of these as I take tidbits out of this podcast to kind of promote it. But how would you identify these? Let's just go down the list. Let's start with the American dog tick. How would you identify them? What are the characteristics of those ticks?
Well, importantly, each tick actually has multiple life stages. So there's the larvae or the baby tick, the nymph or the teenage tick, and the adults. And only the adults have sex differences. So you would have a male and a female at that stage. And actually, all of these life stages can appear different. but most of the time people are encountering nymphs and adults. So we could, limit our descriptions to the adults, but the males and females also look different. Generally speaking, the American dog tick and the Gulf Coast tick look nearly identical. They both are kind of a larger brown tick that has a lot of like silvery white ornamentation on both the females and the males. The Lone Star tick, the female has a white dot in the center of her back, and she's kind of a more yellow color. The male of that species is similarly kind of very round and yellowish, and he does not have a white dot, but he has kind of multicolor ornamentation around the bottom part of his body. And the black-legged tick or deer tick, the males are very small and plain brown, dark brown, almost a black. And the females have kind of a rust-colored body, and the rest of them is blackish brown, which is why we call it the black-legged tick. The Asian longhorn tick is a very red-brown, small tick that has no ornamentation at all. But really importantly, what I tell people is once these ticks start to feed, they change color and shape dramatically. Mm-hmm. So it's really important that we save the tick for identification by someone who's knowledgeable about ticks.
Yeah, I think anyone who has pets or any animals that are outdoors or simply maybe just didn't check themselves very well from coming in from outside may at some time have seen an engorged tick on something. And that's usually when you catch them, maybe not on yourself, but on your pets if you don't catch them when they first get on them. We have a black lab, and it's almost nearly impossible to see a tick on him unless, it's already has been there and it's been feeding for a little bit and somewhat engorged.
Right. And I feel like that's why, to some extent, it can be a disservice that we typically only show people what ticks look like when they're unfed, because people will say to me, Dr. P, I know it wasn't a black-legged tick because it's a big gray squishy tick. But actually that's what that same kind of reddish rust-colored tick looks like when it has taken a meal for several days.
Yeah. And so how would you identify from the engorged tick? Is there still some characteristics you look for? And I know this is going to be hard for people to visualize, and this might be an unfair question, but I'm kind of curious. How would you, I understand somebody that's knowledgeable in it, but what do you look for when trying to identify the specific species once they've become engorged?
Yeah, so people who do tick identification actually use the mouth parts of the tick and some aspects of their underside. So around their, I guess we can call them armpits on the arms of the ticks, there are some particular formations there. And on the mouth parts of the tick, the shape of those, the ratio of the length of the mouth parts to the head piece, and all of these features are very specific to different species of these ticks. So we use those features. We don't actually look at coloration at all.
Okay. Basically some technical stuff that the layperson's not going to do.
Right.
So you started talking about the different life stages of the ticks, that you have the larvae, the nymph, and the adult, which I kind of like how you talked about the larvae being like the infant or the child, and then the nymph being the teenager, and then you have the adult, which I kind of like that analogy you made there. It makes a lot of sense for people to hear. So yes, we come across the nymph and the adult version, and so why is it that we don't normally come across the larvae version?
Well, it definitely depends on which species we're talking about. But the larvae are extremely tiny. And so some people may not notice them or see them at all. They also typically hatch in a singular pile, so they are very heterogeneous on the landscape. So, either you're going to walk right into one of those large balls of freshly hatched larvae, or you're going to miss them entirely. Whereas the later stages will have dispersed more on the landscape. But also, each of these different life stages will potentially prefer different animals, different hosts. different life stages. So some of them, for example, those American dog ticks, we almost never see larvae or nymphs on people or dogs, just the adults. Lone stars, though, a lot of people do encounter the larvae. So we call it a tick bomb or a tick ball when you walk into one of those, and there will be hundreds to thousands of them. Some people call them turkey mites in the turkey hunting world. Those are actually often larval lone stars. But nymphs of most of these species and adults are all willing to bite dogs and people.
I've heard a lot of things out there, and one of those things that I think you're going to be the best person to dispel this myth, or maybe even confirm it, is that it's only the females that bite.
Well, males will definitely bite, but the goal of a male is to find a female. And so he does not need to take a large blood meal. So they don't feed for the same length of time and engorge the way a female does. So that is often a reduced likelihood of transmission. So when we specifically talking about Lyme disease, the life stages that are most responsible for transmission are the nymph life stage, that teenage tick, and the adult females. And particularly those teenage black-legged ticks are the most problematic for Lyme disease because they're just so small at that stage that people are less likely to notice them. So they end up feeding longer with the increased chance of transmission.
I've also heard this, and I guess we'll start getting into the disease part here in a minute, but do the adult ticks pass Lyme disease on to their I guess their offspring, or is it something that they pick up from I don't know if you would call it, what host would it be a primary host, or be the first host that they encounter, like a small rodent, and then it spreads with them through there? How does that work?
Well, yeah, so there are very few pathogens that can be vertically transmitted from the adult to the egg so that, those larvae hatch infected. There are some, but there are few. So you're right, most of the time a tick hatches and it is not infected, especially not with Lyme disease. They do have to obtain that or become infected themselves when they feed on a host. And that host could be a variety of small mammals. Most often it's a paramyscus mouse. And they have two chances to become infected. So ticks feed once per life stage. So when that baby tick is looking for that one big meal, it has an opportunity to become infected. So once it feeds, it's going to go and what we call diapause, which is just basically like hibernation, right? It's going to go to sleep and molt into the next life stage. And when it emerges, it will be a nymph. And so if it was not already infected, then when it takes a blood meal as a nymph, it has another opportunity to become infected. And so again, it will then go into diapause and molt and emerge as an adult.
Now, see, that I have heard too, that they only eat once per life stage. So that is something I've heard in the past as well. So, but I think that's interesting for people to know, the lifespan, and also that there's only 3 times that this tick is feeding. That's an interesting fact. So let's dive into, what are the seasons of these ticks? What are the cycles? When are you most likely to encounter most of these species? Like, are some more summer based, some more year round? Like, is there any specific, like, I guess, seasons that they prefer?
Yeah. So the greatest opportunity for interaction with ticks is generally March through November. And even within that, most often in May through August. But importantly, the black-legged tick that can transmit Lyme disease is active year-round, anytime that the ambient temperature is above freezing. So even if there's some snow on the ground, if the air temperature is, 50 degrees, then it might be out being a host at that time. So there is a risk of Lyme disease year-round. But, people are usually wearing more clothes and there's fewer ticks active that time of year. And it's not a time that we see a ton of cases compared to those summer months where there's a lot of different ticks active and people are out much more and they're, wearing their shorts and their sandals. And so there's much more opportunity for them to become infected in those summer months, which is why we kind of have this seasonal trend But it is important to know that there is a risk year-round.
Yeah, I've I kind of learned that the hard way myself. I worked as a ranger for Muskegon Watershed here as a local water conservancy district, and we were searching for, I think it was a capsized boat. And so I was getting back, and I wasn't a lake ranger at the time. I got to walk. And so I'm going back through the woods, and I came out, and, I had brown pants, but I still looked down, like I could see all these ticks on my legs. And this was like the middle of winter. In the middle, I'm like, I didn't think ticks were this active during the winter. And like you said, they were all the black-legged ticks, or what people refer to as the deer tick. So yeah, they are definitely around year round. And I'm starting to see that more and more now. Like I'm starting to notice, like, it's not like I get, I guess, walk through like a tick bomb or anything like that. But I have noticed that here recently, in the recent, past several years, that I've encountered more ticks, on my clothing when I've come back from hunting or come back out from, walking the dogs or whatever later into the seasons compared to it normal. So, and that temperature, I think is, I'm glad you said that, because that's when I started to notice it too. It was like if it was above freezing, even if it was just 35, 36 degrees, I'd end up coming across a tick. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think people need to know that. And that's a good thing to bring out.
Definitely. So as we have, earlier springs and longer summers, those are more days of the year that you could encounter those ticks.
Yeah. And I know we're going to get into like some preventative measures and stuff. I really want to dive in on everything tick, and then move on to, we'll move on to some of those preventive measures to kind of close this podcast out. So Lone Stars, let's focus on them for a minute, because that's kind of a personal thing of mine to get that out, because what's their activity pattern like?
Well, they typically emerge around March, and they will be active in low numbers into October.
Okay. So pretty much like most other ticks, that's about their range then.
Yes.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about the species of Ohio. We got it out about the new oncomers. So let's talk about why these ticks are medically important, and let's talk about some of those vector-borne diseases. Is that all right?
Yeah.
All right. So first off, I think Lyme disease is like the number one thing that most people hear about, right? Especially like the general public, like Lyme disease. And we talked a little bit earlier already about the public ad campaigns and stuff about, spreading awareness about Lyme disease and tick awareness. So let's hammer in on on that tick-borne disease.
Sure. There's, more than 20 some different illnesses we could talk about across these 5 medically important tick species, both for people and companion animals. But I think some of the most important to talk about, you mentioned Lyme disease, so that's always the number one because there's the most cases. But with the Lone Star tick, we're also very concerned about something called ehrlichiosis, which also presents a tick-borne rash and can make people sick. We also should talk about Lone Star ticks because probably the second most abundant tick-borne illness besides Lyme disease, although we don't have concrete numbers on the number of cases, is alpha-gal syndrome. And this is an allergy to quote-unquote mammal meats, but it can also not just be items in your diet. It could be in medications. It can be in cosmetics. It can even be on the little strip on your razor blade. So people who have this allergy, it really can be very disruptive to their life. And there is no immediate treatment option necessarily for it. It can resolve on its own for some people. So knowing how long that you will be affected is very hard to pinpoint. And it's a really big concern at this point in time for Lone Star ticks in Ohio, is that we're going to have a lot more cases of this alpha-gal syndrome that change people's lifestyles in a pretty significant way.
Yeah, it's an allergy. You brought it up as a mammal, as like a, I guess, quote unquote mammal meat, but it shows up in a lot of things because it's not just the meat. It's actually it's a compound in the meat. What is it? What is it again?
It's a sugar molecule. So this is basically a delayed allergic reaction to a sugar molecule called galactose alpha-1,3 galactose, which is just a whole lot to say. So we call it alpha-gal. This Lone Star tick has this alpha-gal and transmits it when it bites. And so it's not caused by, a parasite of any kind. It's just this allergic reaction, which is why it's difficult to monitor and difficult to treat.
So is the Lone Star tick the only tick that's capable of?
Well, it is definitely the tick that's predominantly responsible for alpha-gal. We do know that the footprint of alpha-gal syndrome, like the number of cases and the geographic distribution of those cases in the U.S., is wider than the Lone Star tick to some degree. So there's probably the possibility of some other ticks, but if they do, it's in very rare circumstances. So there is pretty good alignment between where the Lone Star tick occurs and where we see these cases.
Now, would that be because the Lone Star, like you said, they're an active feeder? They're very aggressive. What were the characteristics of them that have won them the title of being aggressive?
So there are kind of two strategies in the tick world of how ticks find their hosts. So all of them will kind of wait on the tips of vegetation with their little arms outstretched. But some of them are more patient than others, you could say. So the black-legged tick is what we call an ambush tick. It essentially doesn't move more than maybe 3 meters on its own in its life. So it's not going to move very far to find a host. It's going to sit and wait. Whereas the Lone Star tick is the strategy we call pursuit ticks. And so they are much more willing to move towards a cue that they sense from a nearby host and move towards that actively. So they can move maybe 20 meters to find a host. So we call them aggressive because they are willing to almost hunt you down in a sense. That
just makes them even more scarier. Not only are they spreading alpha-gal syndrome or have the ability because of the I guess that alpha-gal is in their saliva. Is that why?
Correct.
Is that where we get it from? Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong, but when a tick bites, and then there's a couple other like blood type, parasitic animals that do this. But when a tick bites in their saliva, they have like isn't it like first off like a numbing agent and also like a anticoagulant that they introduce, and also that
you could think of it as a cocktail of a variety of useful compounds that both make them less likely to be detected and to keep your blood flowing.
And then inside that is it with the Lone Stars is they inject that alpha. They can inside their saliva is that alpha-gal,
right?
Which is that very long compound you said that I'm not going to try to repeat. So
correct, yes. Just like the potential pathogens that they could transmit, these things are part of. They're in the salivary glands and they, are expelled in the saliva when that tick is feeding.
So, I mean, I think we touched on it a little bit already when we talked about the prevalence rate, and it sounds like we don't have really good numbers on that yet when it comes to alpha-gal syndrome. So I don't want to give out any false information to anybody, but you did bring up a good point that we see a higher prevalence rate per se in locations that Lone Star ticks are found. And I guess here's my big question. How long have Lone Star ticks, this might even be a very unfair question, but how long have Lone Star ticks been in Ohio? Because I think you and I talked a little bit earlier, and I was like, I didn't know that they were here. And I guess I'll share this story real quick, and then I'll turn it back over to you. So we went down to, and I didn't know they were here, and I never really worried about them. I've heard about them, but I always thought they were southern, like Texas, things like that. Probably because of the Lone Star, whatever. But down in the the southern part where it's a little bit warmer. So we usually go down to southern Ohio for like a long weekend type of turkey hunt where we backpack in, and we kind of treat it like a backcountry elk hunt, but we're turkey hunting. And normally, like, I will treat all my stuff with permethrin, and and I always recommend it to the guys that are going with us. I said, make sure you treat your stuff. Well, not to make this very long, but one of my buddies was extremely busy. He wasn't able to get it done, and he said, "Dude, I don't have time to do it." I'm like, "You're gonna regret it." And so we head down there. I don't think we're even halfway through our first morning. And we get, our camp set up where we're going to, kind of base our hunts out of. And we start looking at him, and he's got ticks on him, right? And I start looking a little bit deeper, and I see this little white dot on the abdomen of one of them. Like, oh my goodness, that is a Lone Star tick. And not only it scared me, to be honest with you, because I've heard about the alpha-gal before, because this one actually had bitten him already, right? It was a recent bite. It couldn't have been more than a few hours, but I had no clue Lone Star ticks were in Ohio until that moment. So I guess I will turn it back to you. How long have they actually been here?
Well, I don't have a solid year for you, but it's definitely been here at least since the year 2000, and it was probably in small numbers a little bit before that. But it is growing in both numbers and in counties, as it's spreading comfortably across Ohio. So it's most abundant in the southern half, but could be encountered in any county.
Do you have like, I guess I'll ask you this. Do you have like an idea, maybe a specimen that came from you from a northern county, like that for sure about how far north, or what would be the most northern specimen someone turned into you?
Well, there are specimens, clear up the east coast of the United States. So they go all the way north. But there's definitely specimens reported from our northernmost counties in Ohio. We just don't have large numbers of them submitted from those areas.
Okay.
So there's some in Tuscarawas.
Yay.
Where you are, and other counties in that area.
Actually, I've not come across one here in Tuscarawas County yet that I've noticed. I usually check pretty well when I come back in, but I also treat my clothes, especially this time of year. So I at least find some of the remains of one that has tried to hitch a ride with me. But so yeah, mostly I come across is the most I come across are black-legged ticks, and then the dog tick every now and again. Like I don't see as many of them as I do black-legged ticks. So, so yeah, alpha gall is kind of one of those scary things, and you've already touched on this, that yes, there is no immediate remedy for it, and some people can I guess kind of, it works its way out of some people, not all, and it could be something that affects somebody for the rest of their life. Like I first got introduced to it because the hunting public, one of their spouses had developed alpha gall syndrome, and like, not everyone who listens are hunters and stuff to this, but that would totally change my entire life if I came with that. Not because of like of eating meat, but just the reason why I do some of the outdoor activities. Like it totally would negate that. So that would be almost, I don't want to say devastating, but it would definitely be life changing to be affected by this. So I think
absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's good for people to hear about it as well. It's rising, and as you said, it's like the number 2 thing. But Lyme disease, can we touch on that just a little bit, and then I want to circle back to one of those other diseases that Lone Star ticks that you guys are looking at. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but we'll come back to it. But let's talk about Lyme disease for a minute. What ticks are responsible for Lyme disease? Is it all of them? Is it just a couple of them?
Only the black-legged tick or deer tick can transmit the agent of Lyme disease.
Only the black-legged tick, huh?
Yes.
Because that's on the rise, right? Or has been on the rise. Maybe we're just testing for it, more and more people becoming aware of it, or more people got to start going outdoors in the 2020. Maybe that's why we started this big public campaign. I'm not 100% sure. But Lyme disease, that's a bacterial infection, correct?
Correct. And generally speaking, this trend is not unique to Ohio. So while there are probably some elements of awareness and things like that with case counting, largely we're seeing this trend nationally. And that has a lot to do with the expansion of the range, which is, the distribution of where this tick is found. So it has been kind of converging on the lower Midwest, Ohio River Valley area.
So what are the typical, I guess, is there like a typical range or typical location that black-legged ticks, like a habitat that they prefer, or is it just one of those things that if there's animals, they're going to be there?
No, they are very selective in where they will be found. So they have a high risk of dehydration. So they do not like open canopy. So open fields are not good for black-legged ticks. You will typically only find them in areas that have canopy, so wooded trees. They love leaf litter. And sometimes you can find them at kind of the transition zones, those edges. They can be quite abundant in those transition zones, so along trailways, along the edges of fields. But they like wooded habitat. Conversely, the American dog tick is much more tolerant of of dry habitats, and they prefer those open pastured areas. So big, tall grass pastures is more likely to be where you find those American dog ticks.
Okay. And we said the American dog tick was a medically important tick. Why is that? Why that tick in particular?
That tick is responsible for transmitting the bacteria that causes Rocky Mountain spotted fever, which is a very serious tick-borne illness. It can result in the loss of limbs or even life. However, the bacteria is in pretty low prevalence or abundance in the tick population, so we don't have a ton of cases, human cases each year. It is still very important and significant when we do, but we do not see the same number of cases as we do with Lyme disease and some of these other conditions we're talking about, because it's just not very abundant in the ticks themselves.
Okay. So I've always heard that with a Lyme disease that you end up with like a risk factor is a tick bite, obviously, that develops a bullseye rash. What about is that true, or is that kind of like not always the case?
So about 60 to 70% of people will develop a round rash that expands with Lyme disease. It is not always a bullseye shape. In fact, it can take multiple forms. It doesn't have to have, like a clearing around the center to have a bullseye. And again, that means about 30% of people will never notice a rash. So when you see it, it is pretty indicative that that's what you're dealing with, but it may be possible that you are one of the people who don't have that classic rash and you still have Lyme disease.
Okay. So now let's jump back to Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Is there a rash or something, some type of indicative type development that an individual would get?
So Rocky Mountain spotted fever, the spotted fevers get their name because, you have all these flu-like symptoms and you have a very dispersed, small red dots rash on various parts of your body. And so you also get that similar type of rash with the other disease I talked about that comes from Lone Star ticks called ehrlichiosis. So a lot of tick-borne illnesses come with a rash, but not always. So anytime you have a tick bite, it's important to consider that, if you have any signs of illness some period of time after that bite, then it could be, even if you don't have a rash, that you have contracted a tick-borne disease.
Okay. So is that most of them are bacterial based, right?
Correct. Most.
Okay. Most. Yeah, not all. Alpha-gal is definitely not. That one's that's a totally different thing. But
right. There are some viruses and some blood parasites as well.
So I guess the most prevalent that we have here in Ohio we're going to see is Lyme disease and alpha-gal. And then we've talked a little bit about Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Is there any others that people should be aware of?
Yeah, so I think Lyme disease, ehrlichiosis, and alpha-gal are probably going to be the most common. We definitely have, like I said, Rocky Mountain spotted fever. There's anaplasmosis, babesiosis. We've had our first case of Powassan virus. So, there's a long list of various ailments that you could have, but these are all in pretty low numbers.
Is there any specific ticks that are associated with those latter three that you gave? I'm assuming the first two you gave me outside of ehrlichiosis and alpha-gal and Lyme disease. Those are blood-borne pathogen or blood-borne parasites. Is that the first two you gave me?
So anaplasmosis is also a bacterial disease that you can get from the black-legged tick or deer tick. Babesiosis is a blood-borne parasite that you can also get from that same tick.
And the virus, what was that virus again?
Powassan virus is also from the black-legged tick or deer tick. So generally speaking, the reason we consider the black-legged tick to be the most significant threat to public health is because they can technically transmit up to 7 known, human pathogens. So most of them are in low numbers of cases besides Lyme disease, but they are very risky.
So in other words, the black-legged tick is like the evil villain of the tick world then, because he or she is spreading just about everything. So let's talk about some preventative measures. What are the best ways for someone to prevent encounters with, obviously not going out in the outdoors? That's not an option. What are the best ways for someone to prevent
right, setting
bites?
aside the idea of avoiding tick habitat, like presuming there's a reason that you're in various habitats. I really liked how you laid it out as good, better, or best. So let's use that framework. So good is doing a tick check. So ticks often can take some time to transmit. Well, first of all, it takes some time to find a good spot to tuck in and cement into place and begin feeding. So the sooner you get that tick off, the less likely they are to be able to have transmitted a pathogen to you. So tick checks can go a long way to prevent tick-borne disease. But better than tick checks is also wearing clothing that is light colored, tucking your socks into, or your pants into your socks and your shirt into your pants, just so there's less access to skin. Even better than that is to also wear a tick repellent on any exposed skin. So there's a wide variety of repellents. I always say whatever lifestyle you have, if you're into plant-based products, the EPA has a website called Find the Repellent That's Right for You. And you can basically say, like, you want protection from the following arthropod vectors, and you want it for this amount of time, and you can filter through and see what products the EPA has basically evaluated and say are sufficiently protective. So there is a plant-based product, there's DEET, there's picaridin. So, whether you don't want to use a certain chemical, if you don't like the smell, if you don't like the feel, like, there are repellents that are protective for all types of concerns. And so that's better. And then best, in my opinion, is those things plus wearing clothing that's treated with permethrin. And this is what I use for my students. I send my students into, I joke, I send them into Tickmageddon, like they're going out there, literally, intentionally among thousands of ticks to collect them. And it's my job to keep those people safe. And I promise you, all of the, 37,000 ticks in our collection, I have never had anyone on my team get a tick bite. And that is because all of our clothing is treated with permethrin, and you can do that yourself, like you talked about, Sean. You can buy products that have it already in them, and those often last through more washings. So, like, for example, I know some products can last for 70 washings, with the treatment on them. Or if you already have your favorite gear and you want high quality protection on it, and you don't want to apply it yourself, there are also companies that you can mail in, like your favorite Carhartt bibs or whatever, and they will treat them with the permethrin at the industrial grade, and that way you can have those clothes treated. So you don't have to think about doing a lot of remembering to apply your repellents and things. If you go out to the garden, you go out for a hunt or whatever, you throw on your favorite gear that's been treated, then you're in really, really good shape for protection. And then if you follow that up with tick checks and showers, you can be pretty confident that you're going to be safe from tick-borne disease.
Well, I appreciate a lot of the preventive measures there, and I don't want people to get too nervous, and I know our time is very limited, but one last question. What is the best thing for somebody to do if they've been bit by a tick? What should they do?
Yeah, so let's say you do get a tick bite. Well, the first thing is really important to remove it immediately. And so you don't want to wait to go to a doctor. You don't want to apply Vaseline, no gasoline, no matches. None of that stuff actually makes the tick release its mouth parts. It can't actually do that. They literally secrete in their saliva a compound called cementum, aptly named because it cements them into place. So what you want to do is the minute you see any tick that's in place, you just take a pair of tweezers or a tick tool, and you get as close to the skin as possible, and you pull straight directly out. So you get that tick out as fast as you can, and then it's important to save that tick. There's a variety of ways you can do it. You could just put it in a little baggie, put it in the freezer. You could put it in a little hand sanitizer in that bag or in a little container of some kind. And you just want to save it because, we've talked about how only certain ticks can transmit certain disease-causing pathogens. And a lot of these different diseases can look very similar or present very similar with symptoms to your doctor. And so if you have the tick, then you can have that tick identified, and it helps your doctor narrow what should be on their differential diagnoses. So knowing what tick species bit you is important. So I always say, tick bite, remove it, mark your calendar, save the tick. Those are the minimums. You should monitor for any kind of flu-like symptoms or rash for up to 40 or 60 days after that. Just kind of note it, and then you can talk to your physician if you have any symptoms and say, I had this bite. If you get a tick bite, you can also talk to your doctor about your concerns immediately, just to say, like, I had this tick bite and I want to talk with you about, what we should do, if anything, immediately. So that's important. Some people also like to have that tick tested, and that's an option people have as well.
Awesome. And so I've always heard, make sure you get the mouth parts. So let's say someone, and I think that's the best option. Like when you go to pull a tick, make sure you get the mouth parts. But what happens if the tick comes off and the mouth parts stay remained? Is that something that people need to be alarmed about? I mean, because I've heard, you need to get it because it's going to go to your heart. Is this, which
No.
I know that's not true. But,
no. Yeah. I mean, the most important thing is you just want to get that out because it's a foreign body and it could lead to an infection. You do want to be able to clean the bite site with a little soapy water after you remove that tick. So ideally you get the whole tick out. And as I mentioned, for those of us who do tick ID, those mouth parts are pretty important. So that's also a value there. But it really doesn't have impact on, the transmission of pathogens to get that part of the mouth out. You just want to make sure you get as much as you can out. And then wash with the soap and water.
All right. Well, I think we got a good plan for everybody. Risa, is there anything else you'd like to add? Is there some place people can follow you along, or is there some resources that you recommend for the listeners to go to?
Yeah. So Ohio State University has generated a lot of different materials, and we have them organized under one place now, and it's called the Bite Site. So if you were to look up the OSU Bite Site, you would be able to find all of the information that we have about these different ticks. We have videos about how to check yourself or check your cattle, because of course we didn't have time today to talk about, all of the animal pathogens that we could be concerned about, particularly with that Asian longhorn tick. It is having a significant impact on livestock, particularly cattle, and is leading to cattle deaths. So we want people to know how to look for that tick and how to check their cattle, how to check your dog. And there's videos and information about all of that on the Ohio Bite Site. And I mentioned that some people would like to choose to have their tick tested, which can be just kind of another piece of information to provide to your doctor or your veterinarian. And that is now available through Ohio State University. It's called Buckeye Tick Test.
Awesome. Is there anything else you want to say in closing?
Just thank you, Sean, for bringing this timely topic up and allowing me to share with the public.
Risa, I appreciate your time and coming and joining us on this. And without that being said, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
Well, everyone, that was our episode all about ticks, especially those found here in Ohio. I want to thank Dr. Risa Pesapane for joining us today. Our time was a little limited, so we just barely scratched the surface on this very broad topic, really focused more on human interactions with ticks and the diseases they're capable of spreading to humans. I hope that we'll be able to bring Dr. Pesapane back on future episodes so we can broaden that subject into not only our companion animals, but our working animals and possibly even livestock. I really hope that you found this episode to be very insightful and that you walked away with some valuable information, not only to help you identify the different tick species in Ohio, but also understand the importance of the preventative measures that you can take to avoid tick bites and also to help reduce your risk of transmission of one of their diseases that they can spread to us. I know that I learned some things today. One being that there are 14 different species of ticks in Ohio. I was nervous with just the 3 that I knew about, let alone add in that there are actually 5, or at least a handful of medically important ticks, and then the addition of 8 or 9 more that we didn't even talk about today, that are still, that affect our livestock and animals. Like I said, we barely scratched the surface on this. If you want to dive a little bit further into these topics, there are going to be some links in the show notes that Dr. P shared with us, and I highly recommend you dive into those. I really hope that this episode not only educated you in all things ticks, or at least as much as we could cover in an hour, but also gives you a little bit more confidence to go out there and enjoy the outdoors safely, especially as the weather begins to warm here in Ohio. But I think it's time that I quit rambling and we bring this show to a close. First and foremost, I want to thank you as a listener for joining us and listening for the last hour, and that we know that your time is valuable, and we really do appreciate that you took your time to sit and listen to myself and Dr. Pesapane spread the word about those 8-legged parasites. And I hate to ask you to do more. Take a moment to leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice, give us a rating, and also share the podcast with your friends. Help spread the word. Just remember, when you are out there chasing your own experience, may you have the courage to fail, but yet have the humility to learn. And as always, until our experiences cross paths again, we hope you stay safe out there, and God bless you. Thank you for listening to the Country Fried Outdoors Chasing Your Experience podcast. Before you go, don't forget to leave us a review and follow the show on the podcast platform of your choice. Are you hungry for more Country Fried Outdoors? Then follow us on Instagram at Country Fried Outdoors, or subscribe to our YouTube channel at Country Fried Outdoor Productions.